If you ask the average person what a video game looks like, odds are they'll probably describe something like Call of Duty. You got a guy with a gun shooting other guys with guns. A shooter. You look at nearly every AAA studio and it's all they can seem to make. Call of Duty, Battlefield, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, Halo, Destiny, you get the picture. The shooter has become synonymous with studios like Activision because it's the only thing that they produce other than misconduct allegations. Yeah, Microsoft really bought these guys, huh? But where did this genre come from and why is it literally everywhere? Things weren't always like this. So to answer that question, we're gonna have to go back to the beginning. The origins of the FPS are one of technological achievement. Its creation marked progress for gamers and mankind alike. Each development pushed the limits of technology for the time. New ways to generate 3D environments would rise from the depths, allowing for further advancement in both the genre and computer graphics as a whole. The earliest recorded first-person game was developed by MIT students in a NASA work study dubbed Maze War in 1973. Yeah, Call of Duty only exists because of NASA, you know, the guys that take us to space. Now, this was far from the shooty fun time that we're all used to, but it pioneered the first-person perspective. Up until this point, you had a dude on the screen that you were controlling. You had a character, be it Mario, Pac-Man, or Line from Pong. But for the first time, the character was you. Now, this wasn't really as much of a game as it was a science project. It used very rudimentary vector graphics to display a hallway, and for a while, that's what first-person games looked like. They were basically a series of images stitched together to provide the illusion that you were progressing. These games often took the form of a maze or a hallway, and the resulting claustrophobic angle gave the subgenre the nickname Rat's Eye View, which is fitting considering how janky these games looked. But by the early 90s, a new technique emerged from a tiny little studio called id Software, and they will become the main character of the story for a bit. Their journey to becoming the pioneers of the genre started in 1991 when they released a game called Hover Tank 3D. Yeah, the classic title we all know and love. Listen to the incredible voice acting. And listen to that compelling soundtrack. But although this game isn't well known today, it is very important because it pioneered the technique known as raycasting. Raycasting is the process of casting a virtual light onto a 3D space to create the image on screen. Now, I'll do my best to explain it, but essentially it's what allows the computer to interpret a 3D environment and display it to us. The camera fires virtual rays of light that produce the vertical map for the horizontal that it reads. It says this wall should be here, and that wall is blue, the floor is here, the floor is gray, the sky is here, the sky is black. This allows for very fast 3D rendering of environments as opposed to rendering the entire thing. If you have a 100 by 100 pixel screen, you would only need to render 100 rays rather than the 10,000 total pixels needed to fill the screen. But because of this, you can't actually look up or down, and it leaves things looking very bland. So this technique was combined with texture mapping, where 2D textures are added to a 3D object in id's next game, Catacomb 3D. Instead of the blank walls and hover tank, there was something to actually look at. Let's go, this is a win for gamers. For the uninitiated, texture mapping is what is used in most games today for 3D objects, except how they're used today is a little different than how they were used back then. Think of a Minecraft texture pack. Each block has a different texture that gets applied from an image file onto the face of each cube. Except here it was using that same raycasting technology, but using textures instead of colors. Catacomb 3D was still considered a maze game, but it was still a lot better than its predecessors. And with the creative juices flowing between John Carmack and John Romero, the genre was about to step into a new era. Enter Wolfenstein 3D. While technologically it was running on a similar engine to Catacomb, Wolfenstein is the game that everyone credits as the first FPS, although there were two more id titles that did similar things before it, and it's closer to 2.5D than it is to 3D. But the reason Wolfenstein is remembered is thanks to its genius shareware model. The game was released for free for everyone, with them being able to make money by saying, hey, if you want to play more, you can buy more levels. This made it very widely available. That and the game's violent World War II setting, if you can call it violent anymore, made it stand out as a true gaming experience for PC users. It was revolutionary, and you could play it on your home computer. But this was only the beginning for it. Only a year after the release of Wolfenstein, id released what is probably the most influential FPS game of all time, Doom. Doom was the perfect refinement of all the ideas used in Wolfenstein, and this time it was actually 3D. Not only did it boast a much better resolution, but it added new level geometry and allowed for platforming thanks for traversal on the Y-axis. You could move up and down. It's crazy. For the first time, you could elevate. Yeah, this was a big deal. Following Doom's release, other games followed in its footsteps, such as Duke Nukem 3D. It also released Doom 2, a sequel which refined the experience and added a great deal of new content. However, it remained in the same Doom engine and didn't boast any graphical improvements. Around this time, most FPS games looked like Doom, with 2D sprites being used instead of models for things like enemies and weapons, but they were all built in the same or a similar engine. These games would be referred to as Doom clones, but soon they would break out into a genre of their own. In 1996, id changed the game once again with the release of Quake. Quake was all about movement, and the focus on fast-paced gameplay and online multiplayer made it an instant hit. The online functionality also created one of the earliest platforms for video sharing, where gameplay sessions would be recorded as demos and uploaded online for others to watch in-game before video streaming was in any way a viable option. Quake is probably the closest thing that we have to modern games today. Quake was a game that was fully 3D. You could go up and down, you could look up and down, you had so many movement options, and its engine would lay the groundwork for some engines that are still used today. Quake's impact on the PC industry was incredible, and it would go down as not only one of the most influential FPS games, but one of the most influential games ever. However, id's time in the spotlight was about to fade. All of this innovation was happening on the PC, but at the same time, the console industry was making its leap into the third dimension. Finally, the once PC-exclusive FPS genre made its way onto the console, and the first major console shooter would release on the N64. Its name, GoldenEye 007. Compared to Quake, GoldenEye wasn't necessarily the better game. While both were popular for their multiplayer modes, they played very differently. And while Quake was pioneering online multiplayer, GoldenEye had something Quake could only dream of. 2 words: split screen. This last-minute addition made by one single guy made this game an instant hit among friends, creating the perfect couch co-op experience. GoldenEye wasn't the first FPS on console. In fact, Doom 64 came out earlier the same year, but GoldenEye was what really defined the genre on console. While PC was more focused on single player and was more mechanically driven, console shooters would have a strong focus on multiplayer and split-screen antics.
Good morning, and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System.
Meanwhile, on PC, a little company called Valve would release their first game, Half-Life. Their new take on the genre implemented a much stronger focus on story, with actual NPCs other than enemies, and a focus on puzzles and platforming alongside the strong combat. Half-Life used a heavily modified version of the original Quake engine, which would be further modified with parts of the Quake 2 engine to create Valve's signature Source engine. 1998 also saw the release of Unreal from Epic Games. Yes, that Epic Games. This created the Unreal Engine, which would get updates over time, powering countless games including Deus Ex, Mass Effect, Gears of War, and well, there's another one.
Cortana, all I need to know is, did we lose them?
By the 2000s, the genre was exploding with games like Quake 3 Arena and Epic Games Unreal Tournament, creating the standard for online multiplayer. And a fun little mod of Half-Life called Counter-Strike was starting to gain some popularity. The time was coming for the FPS to become a mainstay in the industry, and with a brand new console generation on the horizon, it was about to go fully mainstream. The original Xbox launched in 2001 with Halo Combat Evolved as its main launch title. Halo is what carried the Xbox. In 2004, Halo 2 would release, setting the standard for online multiplayer on consoles. Over on the GameCube, Nintendo was dipping their family-friendly toes into the dark and gritty FPS world with Metroid Prime 1 and 2. These would become instant cult classics, with a highly anticipated 4th installment allegedly in development for the Switch. It was like 4 or 5 years ago at this point. Will it come out? Maybe. Comment if you're in the future and it came out. But the main contender of this generation was the PS2, being the highest selling console of all time. time. While Sony didn't have any major FPS games of their own, they held a very large platform for the Medal of Honor series, which started back on the PS1. The series had 3 releases on the PS2, with 2 being ported to Xbox and GameCube, and the 3rd being ported to the Wii. There were also 2 games made for the PSP and several for PC. Medal of Honor popularized the World War II setting on consoles, inspiring 2 future titans, with the release of Battlefield 1942 in 2002 and Call of Duty in 2003. The trend of historical-based shooters lasted till around 2008, with Call of Duty and Battlefield switching to more modern warfare, and the subgenre still existed but was far less popular. And judging by COD Vanguard, it's getting less popular every day. Half-Life 2 was released in 2004 with the official launch of the Source engine. Source would give us games like Left 4 Dead, Portal, CSGO, and Team Fortress, which all innovated in their own ways and remain popular to this day. The next generation of consoles further solidified the genre, with Halo 3 becoming the best-selling game of 2007. This was a major accomplishment for Microsoft, giving the Xbox brand the power that it has today. In the same year, Activision would release Modern Warfare, which was an instant hit. Following this came a period from 2009 through 2012, which marked the COD Golden Age. Their yearly shooters became the best sellers 4 years in a row. After this point, the genre was so widespread that it was hard to tell an FPS from another game at this point. And even if something wasn't strictly a first-person shooter, it still used elements from the genre. Like, you could technically call Minecraft an FPS, but that's a bit of a stretch. Fortnite is a third-person shooter, but you can scope in now, so is it a first-person shooter? I don't know. The point is, the genre is huge, it's massive, and it's synonymous with so many 3D games at this point. Over the years, there have been many different trends and different ideas at work, allowing for many different types of games in the same genre. This makes the genre uniquely accessible for anyone. Like, if you play Doom, you probably won't have much trouble with Call of Duty, and if you know COD, Overwatch isn't that hard to learn. These are 3 very different games, but if you know how to aim, you'll be able to easily jump into any of them. There's a level of skill that transfers between games, unlike, say, MOBAs, where you have to memorize cooldowns and map positioning for each individual game. This made the FPS the perfect genre for pro esports to develop. The Call of Duty and Overwatch leagues, along with Pro CSGO and R6 Siege, are treated as mainstream sporting events with large-scale spaces and live commentaries. I think this ease of access is partially responsible for the meteoric rise of the genre. It's just really interesting how easy these games are to pick up and play for anyone while being so unique and different in their own rights. This genre is just so intertwined with the evolution of the industry that it's absurd. Quake and Unreal unknowingly spawned hundreds of games from their engines alone. Because of Quake, Valve was able to create Half-Life, which started Valve's rise to the top, creating the easiest and most streamlined ways to buy games on PC. Because of Unreal, the Unreal Engine spawned countless games in many other genres that weren't even FPS, that were easier to develop because of the tools provided by the engine itself. I think it's really interesting just to see how much power this one genre has over the entire industry. And it continues to evolve and push boundaries into VR. The VR shooter is the natural evolution of the FPS, with games like Half-Life Alyx, which completely changed the way you think about what a game can even be. Pavlov VR, Boneworks, and even VR Chat show us how much potential these games have to be immersive and super cool experiences. It's still a first-person experience, but you're so much further involved than ever before. The FPS has been one of the most influential genres of all time, pushing the technological limits and dominating the industry. In the future, it'll be interesting to see what happens to the genre. Will it be replaced with VR shooters, or will it remain a constant? Only time will tell. I doubt that it's going anywhere anytime soon. However, I am interested in seeing what series takes the leap to VR next. I could see a VR Call of Duty game being really fun if Activision would stop messing around. Microsoft better get them in line. I mean, it would be perfect considering how big VR is becoming. But for now, we can still enjoy what we have. The legendary FPS legacy will live on in the background of these new games. The Source 2 engine, which allows for VR development for games like Half-Life Alyx, is just an updated version of that same Quake engine from the 90s, and it's taking us into the next generation. Now, they definitely added a lot. It is very heavily modified. I don't know how much of the ship of Theseus this engine is at this point, but that's the history of the FPS. It was a crazy ride with a lot of different people involved, but I think it's really cool to see that the people who started the genre still have a presence in the code that they wrote over 25 years ago. It just feels poetic. But with that being said, I hope to see you in the next one.